Good morning, good afternoon. Hello, everyone. This is Lakai Newman with SoDA. Thank you for joining today's call. Today's discussion will explore the modern agency operating system, digging into the ways in which agency leaders are evolving their operating model and making investments in modern technologies to enhance visibility and accelerate productivity, team collaboration, talent management, and overall business performance. We're joined by SoDA members Albert Banks of Union, Jameson Proctor of Athletics, and our webinar partner, Mavenlink's Brent Trimble. Moderating today's discussion is SoDA's Executive Director, Tom Beck. A few notes before we begin. As a reminder, we are recording today's call to return highlights to you and your teams. Please feel free to ask questions, share your thoughts and reactions in the Zoom Q&A or the chat feature. We'll do our best to address all questions and we'll capture ideas for future discussions as well. I will turn it over to Tom to get started.
Hi, welcome everyone. Thanks for carving time out of your day to join us. We're thrilled to have you. And I'm thrilled to be joined by three close colleagues, Albert Banks from Union, Jameson Proctor from Athletics, and Brent Trimble from Mavenlink. So we're looking forward to a great conversation today. Before we jump in, we've got the chat room opened or the chat window open. So we encourage you to make comments along the way or pose questions. We will be monitoring for questions and we'll take those in line if we can, or we'll save some of them for the end. So feel free to use that. As you'd like. So without further ado, I want to jump right into the conversation today. And I want to start with just a little bit of background on each of our panelists that will help us provide context for the discussion that's coming up. So we'll start with just a little bit of background on your agency or business, where you're located, size, kind of areas of focus, just to give a little context as we get deeper into the discussion. So I'll start with you, Jameson.
Great, thanks, Tom. Hey everybody, I'm Jameson Proctor. I'm a partner and the Executive Digital Director at Athletics. We're a Brooklyn-based creative agency that focuses on creating digital-first brand identities and brand-first digital experiences. We were founded in 2004, and since then we've grown to be a team of about 35, with, I'd say, 50% of that growth happening in the past 4 to 5 years.
Cool. Brent, why don't you give us a quick rundown of your background?
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you for having me and excited for the conversation. Brent Trimble, I almost 2 years here at Mavenlink. I lead our agency vertical practice. Agencies comprise a pretty sizable portion of our user base, and I work with both strategy and solutioning of our platform, listening to clients on how we can improve. And prior to that, had leadership and growth roles at various agencies, including holding codes like IPG and WPP, some independents, and in management consulting.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining us today, Brent. And Albert, why don't you give us a lowdown on your background and Union?
Absolutely. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm a partner and vice president of operations at Union. We're located in Charlotte, North Carolina, and currently about 60 folks. We're an independent creative and performance marketing agency. We create omni-channel campaigns, really focusing on pairing creative with data to help produce sort of memorable, measurable, and repeatable results. We have some specialties in terms of industry, travel and tourism, health and wellness, food and beverage. We were founded back in 2002, and I joined via a merger of my former agency, MyJive, back in 2018. I've kind of grown into this role. I was our first web developer, then technical developer, director, and then I kind of moved into working on the business as opposed to in the business. So that's kind of my journey into this role.
Well, that's great. Well, thanks again, guys, for carving time out to join us today. And I want to start with a question just to level set sort of where you guys are at in your journey of implementing kind of technologies within your own agency. And again, to be clear, for the audience, we're focused very specifically on the tools and the technologies that we use to run our agencies operationally, in terms of people, resource management, sales, marketing, et cetera. one of the things we've witnessed, certainly in running our own businesses, but heavily within the SoDA community, is that there's certain levels of either size or kind of maturation within the agency business where you start to feel the need to implement better tools and technology, maybe more rigor, discipline from a process perspective. It's a different scenario when you're under 10, people and bootstrapping everything and, business ops by spreadsheet, which can continue well on into the hundreds of people and tens of millions of dollars I've seen. But I'd love to hear just a little bit about, your perspective on your agency and maybe a couple key phases of growth and where and why you saw the need to get more serious about kind of your business operations, as it relates to technology and processes. And I'll start with you, Jameson.
Great. I'd start by saying that, I'm a big fan of a book called Growing Pains by Eric Flamholtz and Yvonne Randall. And I'll get to the reason why here in a second, but really the focus of that book is building sustainably successful organizations. And that involves, making the transition from an entrepreneurship to a professionally managed agency, right? And it also involves sort of identifying the symptoms of an organizational development gap, right? Which is essentially the gap between the infrastructure we have to run our agencies and the infrastructure we need to run our agencies. And the cure to those symptoms is acquiring the resources, developing or implementing the support systems, the management systems, and the culture, required to evolve, mature, scale, grow, et cetera. And so, for us to get into like specifics, when we started to approach that 20 plus team member mark and that $5 million in gross profit mark, my business partners and I realized that we could no longer, run the business the way that we had been, which was, being entrepreneurially led, right? We wore a lot of hats, excuse me. And, we made most of our decisions from the gut. So we started first and foremost, as you do, by hiring some folks that were smarter than we are, and really working with them to determine the sorts of operational support systems that we needed to invest in. And the pain points that we were experiencing, if I had to boil it down, I'd say it came down to understanding the actual resources and the time needed to deliver work at the level of innovation, at the level of quality that we want it to. And then using the intelligence that we got from that to quickly make critical decisions around account growth, new business, and hiring. Because, prior to that, again, it was all coming from the gut. Hey, yeah, I think we have enough money to do this. Let's do it. Yeah, we should be able to take that project on and deliver it on time and, at quality. And, you get to this point where you start to feel the speed wobbles, right? You start to feel the wheels and you go, okay, I need to make some changes.
Yeah. That's all. And so thank you for that. And do you mind just mentioning again, I captured the book in the chat window, but do you just mind mentioning the authors again? Or maybe while I chat with Albert, you can type in the authors of the book, Growing Pains.
I'll type them in the chat, Tom.
Awesome. Thank you, Jameson. Yeah, Albert, so I'd love to hear, and you've had now a view both into your own agency at MyJive and then, and then you merged with Union, but I would love to hear some similar context from you on just when and why did you start to feel some of the need to get more serious about your operations and the kind of the technology infrastructure that supports the way that you run your business?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in both roles, I think anybody that's in a service business or an agency for sure has that stress of uncertainty of the future, right? There's a lot that's out of our control. And I think that's also inherent with entrepreneurs and maybe we're gluttons for punishment a little bit, but really leading up to probably prior to 2019, most of the sort of data we had on our business, on our projects were really backwards looking. It was really information that we could only make adjustments like for 3 months out. Like we really couldn't make any kind of real-time adjustments. So certainly that was a major challenge. Further, we had all bits of our data and many different tools and systems across, marketing leads, sales pipeline, project management, time tracking, resourcing, invoicing, revenue profit. Like a lot of these things were in very, sort of disparate places. So to really have a good look at our business, we spent a lot of time developing sort of custom web apps, very elaborate spreadsheets. I'm a pro at Google Sheets, to sort of tie all the data sources together, and then try to keep them up to date, right? So that was a big lift. Around the same time, we lost a significant client. I think everybody here who may have experienced that's sort of a reflective moment, and we had to kind of figure out a new charter course forward, right? And we started looking at our situation, that we found it was really challenging to figure out where the holes were, where we needed to invest. And so that was a sort of an aha, like, okay, we can't keep running the business this way. We need to be more future facing. So we committed to doing that, elevating our data and insights. We really had 5 goals: consolidate as many systems as possible, form sort of a single source of truth, keep the data as real time as we possibly can, add data that was forward looking, not just backwards looking, and then purposefully and consistently measure that information to discover insight. To Jameson's point, leverage that insight as quickly as possible and make changes that we believe could have sort of an immediate impact. And I'll plug Mavenlink here. We did choose them, and they're a single source of truth for many of the things I just described. We've been able to consolidate many of those tools and systems and have kind of nearly real-time data. And it also adds the ability to add future-looking data, particularly around resource capacity planning, revenue forecasting, things like that, so we can feel more confident, I guess, in our future, or maybe at least have a better understanding of what our future looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And Brent, I want to get to you in just a minute, but and we'll keep this one brief, but it's a journey, not a process, we know. And both of you have talked about, I think it's really in probably the last 3, Albert, in your case, maybe the last 2 to 3 years, Jameson, in your case, maybe the last 3 or 4 years. I would love to just for the audience here, particularly those who are, at some point in their journey or considering a next step to get more serious about the technology they use to run their agency. Can you tell us a little bit about, how long you've been in the journey, and also just sort of where you think you're at? I mean, knowing that you never arrive, but I think time banding some of this will help, because I know it takes years to kind of get where you're going. And Jameson, maybe, and again, there's not a certain arrival, but maybe you can just give the audience a little bit of context on how long you've been at it and how much progress you think you've made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think we've been at it for a solid 4 years at this point, in terms of consolidating and creating a single source of operational truth. And there's, like you said, I mean, there's still work to do, and I think there'll always be work to do. Where we really focused on making initial optimizations for the agency were around cost rates and bill rates, and then tying that to obviously tying that to the tracking of hours, and then getting like Albert said, getting away from looking back and getting to looking forward and forecasting, and starting to really look at resourcing and utilization. And again, for us, a lot of that intelligence right now is focused on project decisioning and strategic hiring. And, where should we be growing? Where are our revenue centers at, and where are our capacity gaps at, and what do we do next? I think, if I look into 2022 and I say, hey, where do we need to go next? I think that it's time for us to really start embracing greater integration and greater automation. We're also a Mavenlink customer. We do have you mentioned spreadsheets. We do have a very, very complex, mature FP&A, financial planning and analysis spreadsheet that we're not moving away from anytime soon. So we need to, get those two systems talking to another. And then we also want to start having business intelligence and project intelligence, housed in the same system. So, a great example of that from my mind, from my perspective, is looking at the integration of something like Jira and Mavenlink. So we've got tasks being driven by project teams, and then we can have, management teams looking at what's actually happening on the ground in a different context.
Yeah, that's great. And I want to jump to Brent then on this, and we take a step back actually a little bit, which, we're talking about the modern technology or the modern agency operating system. And we know that there's a lot of different tools and technologies that play into the agency operating system. In fact, you might find this interesting, Brent. We didn't get a chance to chat about this, but we did a SoDA member census and kind of tool set usage study earlier this year. And on the tool set side, we looked at everything from finance and accounting to timekeeping to resource and project management to team collaboration to, sales and marketing to HR and on down the list in terms of kind of key operational areas. And it's an understatement to say that there's a cornucopia of tools that are used in various aspects of the agency operating system. But from your perspective, maybe you could put a little bit of context on that and talk to us about what you see, how you define the agency operating system and kind of what components and technologies you see as core and instrumental and kind of in essentially where you grow from.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I know, a lot of our conversation will bias toward technology. So I'll certainly go there, but I would start with really the notion of what operations at an agency as it's going through a maturity curve can mean. And first of all, I'd always thought of it and had some really great mentors who said, think of operations as the bulwark of building the conditions for success. And ultimately, we or myself, leading agencies, we want agencies and creative services firms, innovation firms, consultancies to potentially get out of the operations business being a burden or a load, but know that they are a bulwark and they're the backstop for which you can then propel your agency forward, because ultimately, when we look at agencies, they're fundamentally a talent business. Talent is the product, it is the differentiator. And really starting there and just having the conversation that we are no longer going to be the cobbler's children type of scenario and agency. And while we deploy great innovation on behalf of our clients, let's just tune up internally. So starting there and acknowledging that, Albert mentioned squeezing uncertainty out of the life cycle and deal flow. And Jameson talked a little bit about maturity. And I think that's a great place to start for agency leaders. There's some great organizations, great data that can help really start you on that maturity journey by saying, okay, what are the outcomes we want to achieve first? And use Albert's suggestion of squeezing out uncertainty as an example. You could come as leaders and say, we want to have a bit more intelligence on really what is our run rate 12, 16, 18, 24 months from now. And that could be an outcome. And through that, you work your way backward and say, okay, what is the health of our client relationships? Are we scoping correctly? Do we need a bit more emphasis on business development at the front of the funnel, better deal qualification, an array of ways to cast the right team at the right place, time, and margin? And you start to pick those elements within that journey to lead to greater uncertainty and a bit more stability. We know it's a dynamic business, and it always will be. It's a long hour business. We know we're only as great sometimes as our latest win, and have to be sort of that shark that keeps on swimming. So starting there, come up with a few key outcomes. Some agencies might say, we get to the end of the year. We've all worked, 60, 70-hour weeks. And gosh, we didn't make any profit. Our EBITDA is either flat or negative. And if that's an orienting principle to the agency, start there. Say, okay, uncertainty and more profit, and pick a few and work your way back through that journey. And then as it pertains to technology, I think to your question about what would define a really good modern operating system, it's one that gives as close to near-time intelligence, that gives leaders a great insight into the moment in time. And we're all, as agency leaders, we're all sort of always kind of hamstrung, I think, sometimes in that tyranny of the now. We have to, achieve this deliverable at a high degree of satisfaction, but gives you the headlights to look down. I think great attributes of a modern operating system would be it empowers the people, the talent in your shop, that helps position them to succeed. And ultimately, when you look at technology, it's only as good as adoption, right? So if you've got a modern operating system, it's one that's embraced by talent at all levels, and they don't have to get into the nuts and bolts of EBITDA and load on top of rates and that type of thing, but gives them the confidence to know where they're working, the purpose of which they're working, can begin to give them as much transparency as possible, and I think a good foundation of confidence knowing where the agency's headed, and orchestrates a lot of these disparate systems, everything from HR to compliance to all the financial tools that are in place, but ultimately pushes that intelligence down as far as is meaningful, right, to each individual practitioner, and is ultimately adopted, wrapped up in this notion that we as an agency are putting a stake in the ground around running really well. And I'll wrap with an anecdote in this little section, really salient advice given to me probably 7 or 8 years ago. And it was actually by our founder, and it was prior to my relationship with Mavenlink. We kind of had a side conversation. He said, services industries always feel like they have to run at this just incredible tempo, and we've all carried the deal bag, and international flights and nights and weekends and so forth. But you really, if you make that decision that this is going to be a shop that's run well, ultimately you will succeed, and operations don't become necessarily a hindrance to that. The example would be, he was a pre-Accenture IPO partner. Accenture made the decision to go public, and now I think is probably $100 billion valuation, 500,000 people around the world. At the same time they were ascending, there was another management consultancy sort of in the same make and mold called Bearing Point, which had to borrow money, never knew really those ebbs and flows of certainty of where the deals were coming. What kind of certainty do we have to make commitments to the enterprise to hire 12, 16, 18 months out? And they kind of dissolved over time. So one firm made the decision to run well, and the other sort of fell into that trap. I think we have, oh gosh, it's always going to be so velocity driven. Let's just get that latest spreadsheet. Let's just borrow some money. Let's make some big bets without that grounding principle that ultimately gives you the tools and the conditions for success. So that's how I think about it, and I think for agency leaders who are in that, maybe you're 20, 30, 50 people growing, contemplating placing some big bets, think about picking 2 to 3 outcomes, not 7 to 10, because focus on doing a few things well, and then go back in that chain of everything from having a conversation with a client that ultimately leads to an opportunity through collection and getting paid on time, and see what would really help us achieve that outcome. And the technology, the requirements often will flow from that.
Yeah, that's great advice on the outcome piece in particular. And in thinking about the modern agency operating system, I would add some adjectives to your description, which is not just the getting a real-time pulse on the business, but probably how quickly and accurately you can get a real-time pulse on the business. I know for many of us who ran in spreadsheet world for a while, you could eventually get to a pulse on the business, but it would take an inordinate amount of time. And the other piece is to what extent you can accurately look into the future. Again, recognizing that there's always uncertainty in the business. But for those in the audience, I think if you're in a situation where getting a real-time pulse on the business in an accurate and comprehensive sense takes a lot of time and wrangling, then you probably need to start looking at where you're making investments, and adding on to that, if you can't look into the future more than a month or so in terms of resource needs, utilization, pipeline, business forecast, then again, you're probably at this point where you need to start getting more serious about your operating system. So I want to shift a little bit or extend this. Brent, mentioned we've talked about technology a little bit, but I want to move to the equally, if not more critical piece, which is kind of the process and the behaviors and the outcomes that come from it, or that are really necessary for the technology to actually work. And so I'll start with Albert on this one. Can you talk to us in parallel to implementing tools and technology? Can you talk to us just a little bit about what are some of the process changes you've needed to make? What are some of the concrete behaviors that you felt like you've needed to change? And what does adoption look like as you try to get the most out of the technologies that you're putting in place?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll echo what Brent said. I think knowing what you're trying to achieve is huge to do any of this. I mean, we've said from the get-go that we want to be a growing agency that grows sustainably and profitably. And it's when you have critical decisions to make, and it's like, hey, man, this would take a real hit on profitability. It's like, well, we probably shouldn't do it. We should do the thing that will continue our profitability so we can maintain ourselves and address whatever issues those may call. So I think just philosophically being on the same page about what you're trying to achieve is huge. And we share that with every one of our team members of what we're trying to accomplish sort of financially. But you're right. I mean, Mavenlink, HubSpot, our general ledger, like that's where the data is, right? But it's only as powerful as it is accurate, relevant, understood, reviewed, and acted upon, right? So if you're not doing those things, then why are you even collecting the data? So yeah, to put it, into place for us, we certainly had to train our team on the new tool. Certainly new folks, when they onboard, get them trained up. We do clock hours, and there's a divide within our community on whether you should clock hours or not, but we do. And so part of it was really getting pretty strict on people getting their time in by the end of the day on a Friday, so that we can pull reports on Monday morning and potentially make adjustments for that very following week in terms of where we put resources. So that's something that we couldn't do in the past, and it requires 100% adoption from our team. So we had to establish those sort of new processes to make sure that data was added on time and it was accurate. And then working back from the major goals of grow profitably, what are the metrics that we can identify that we know will impact our business, right? And what are sort of those sub goals for those metrics? And then we need to get leadership to truly understand how achieving the goals for those metrics will affect our success. For example, effective bill rate. Well, let's understand what that actually is, and let's understand when it goes up to here or down to here, how that affects our goals and our bottom line. And then create a meaningful cadence to review that data and identify some insights, like why, okay, this month EBR is dipped to here. Well, let's dive into all of the projects and their EBR and figure out what are the ones with the most hours or the lowest EBR, and figure out where there's challenges and act upon that, right? Raise the red flag, get the account project manager, department director, whoever that's involved in this particular engagement on the same page about why it's happening, and then make adjustments, adjust the burn rate, talk about scope or where we're having challenges. Gosh, you could have it on the flip side. You could have a really high EBR. Are we not servicing the client well enough, right? That's also a problem. So again, we have to do something with the data. So literally, to put it into practice, we integrated our general ledger, which is Xero, with Mavenlink. So our invoices are generated within Mavenlink, and that allows us to have revenue tracking within Mavenlink. And so that finally ties in one system our hours and revenue together. We really had to establish more direct connection between my group operations with delivery, which most of y'all would call producers or project management. We run the entrepreneurial operating system at our agency. So another book plug, Traction by Gino Wickman. I got it right here on my desk. And we have a weekly scorecard, right? So again, putting those metrics that are important to your success along the way into a scorecard and keeping it up to date. So right now our scorecard is powered by data from Mavenlink, from HubSpot, from our HR data. And so at a glance, every week we can look at how are we trending on these key metrics we all agree are important relative to the goal that we all agreed upon to reach our goal. And so again, if they're out of whack, right, then we need to do something about them to try to get them back on track. Beyond our leadership team, weekly, monthly meetings to review, some of those key metrics: billable utilization, resource capacity, cost rate, invoiced hours, and again, just make sure we review them, identify the challenges, and I see some questions about what kind of metrics. Yeah, I was kind of prepared for that, so I'll hop in here if you don't mind.
Yeah, Albert, just a second. Yeah, so Hannah, thank you for that question. There's another one in the chat we'll get back to in a moment. But yeah, sure. if you could just spend a minute on, and you track many metrics, so you don't need to go into all of them, but maybe talk about a few that you track on a weekly basis, and make sure you just define them so that everyone knows what you're talking about. So a few you track on a weekly basis, and then a few of the bigger ones that you may monitor on a broader basis.
Yeah, there could be a lot. In fact, when I redid our scorecard, I think I came up with, 50 plus that we could have measured, right? So we kind of narrowed it down to what's the most impactful, right? So I'd say kind of on a monthly view, the most important ones for us would be gross margin. So that's the margin after your sort of cost of doing the work, right? So that's just your people doing the work, right? That's not admin, sales, facilities, right? That's a really critical number. And that's
are you looking at that on both a project by project gross margin perspective as well as a company-wide gross margin?
We focus more on company-wide, but we do check review project profitability within Mavenlink as well. Okay. The other two would be invoiced hours percentage, so the percentage of available hours that we did invoice in that particular month, and effective bill rate. So the revenue during that time period divided by the number of hours spent. And it's remarkable. You can really narrow down to even just these three, and you'll know how your business is performing. If we see low invoiced hours, we're probably going to have a low EBR, but maybe we have a high EBR and it actually compensates for the invoiced hours percentage. And so we can see that kind of moving in tandem and identify where the issues are. And if you're one of those that don't clock time, you can do annual revenue per FTE. That's a way to sort of remove the hours requirement there. So those are kind of the monthly ones.
So just again for the audience, define EBR so everyone's on the same page with that acronym.
Yeah, so effective bill rate. So that's revenue during a time period, for example, a month, divided by the number of hours spent during that same time period. So effectively, what are you getting for every dollar that you spent?
Awesome. Thank you, Albert. So Jameson, let's switch over to you a little bit and just talk about particularly some of the, the process or behavior changes that you've had to work on in parallel to using new technology. You can also maybe address some of the metrics that are, that are really key to your, we'll say, weekly, monthly, operations.
Okay, great. So, I mean, I think one of the things that was really important for us, we kind of did this after we got into these operational support systems, right? Was coming up with some sort of structured goal setting that worked for our team, right? And I mean, there's infinite number of flavors of this. For us, OKRs, objectives and key results, ended up being a really effective framework to create transparency, to create engagement, and to start tying the objectives of the business to measurable results, right? And when we got on the same page with goal setting, as a management team, we started to be able to make more effective use of the infrastructure that we were putting in place. That's, I'm going to switch gears though, and I want to touch on something Brent said about getting the intelligence to the practitioners, right? So another thing that has been really a game changer for us is we identified a member of our production team, our delivery team, and promoted this individual to a resource management or a traffic role. And what we've been able to do is we've been able to synthesize her institutional knowledge of how work gets delivered with the business intelligence around resourcing and utilization that we can get on demand from Mavenlink. Now, where that becomes really important is, a weekly meeting at the beginning of the week, sort of like Albert mentioned, where that individual is sitting down with the discipline leads, the people that are responsible and accountable for actually delivering the work, and having a very informed conversation about the realities of resourcing and utilization. And that, if we rewind, that came out of our structured goal setting as a management team. We identified a place where we were not making use of the technology, and then, over time, put a solution in place. And I think that, I think we all know this, but the reality of the situation is it's more of a cyborg, right? You need the interaction between the human intelligence and the machine intelligence to really affect change in the agency. When it comes to, key metrics, we certainly focus on some of the key metrics that Albert mentioned. Effective bill rate's very important to us. I've been very, very focused over the course of the past 2 years on our EBITDA margin on a monthly basis. And, where Mavenlink and just our operating system for the business has been extremely effective there is allowing us to really get a handle on percent to completion, right? And really actually know, are we going to recognize this revenue this month? Are we actually going to turn in this margin, or have we overestimated the work that we're actually going to do? And that's been critical in us actually having a handle on, how we take that intelligence around percent to completion and tie that to resourcing and utilization in a way that helps us meet our financial goals.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, Brent, I would love for you to just pipe in on this piece too, just on the metrics piece in particular. And, again, I think both Albert and Jameson have done a great job of calling out, this fundamentally has to be based on goal setting and, a goal setting framework that you've established as an agency in a way of managing against those goals, regardless of how you're getting the data. If you don't have that, then the data is just going to come out of a fire hose, right? But maybe share a little bit of your experience in terms of, and we can treat it in sort of like two steps of good places to start, as you think about some operating metrics and where to get some more visibility. And then as you get a little bit more advanced, some metrics that you really can look at that give you a keener view into the business, or, perhaps allow you to project out scenarios a little more confidently.
No, it's a great question. And Albert and Jameson, the metrics they have been speaking to are largely very key because they're fundamentally tied to talent, right?
Right.
And there's great toolkits you can adopt that have been sort of gleaned over time from really well-run professional services organizations. Some agencies, some not, but things that I see good agencies focus on are those outcomes working back, of course, that effective bill rate, or even revenue per colleague, revenue per consultant. It's kind of an arbitrary metric, but you can really predict the health of your agency with that. Certainly, of course, EBITDA, I think a metric that is really important is when you're casting a team and a statement of work, having a fundamentally adopted target gross margin at deal, and being able to then, do you have the data available to cast your team? Now at a 40, 50, 75 person shop, you're going to know your colleagues, right? You're going to know somewhat, but having that taxonomy of their rate, role, your salary load, and then applying that to the statement of work is really key, because that helps you determine, is this good revenue for the agency, or is this revenue at risk? And you can make that decision. We've all made those bets on building relationship, and we're willing to take a little bit of a haircut on margin, maybe building a piece of innovation that can be then recapitalized later for other clients. I think another metric are projects delivered on time, certainly tying that maybe into CSAT with clients, because then that begins to predict a bit of retention with clients. And then that begins to lead into your forecast. Certainly utilization and chargeability are key, and you can get at those whether you're logging time or not. What you'd want to do as operators is make that determination of, when I'm casting a team, what's that increment of value? And am I really capturing that cost load? Then moving up the chain, I think some key metrics that are really key are your pitch to win ratio. You could start to look at that. Definitely pipeline relative to your run rate. And I liked to try to build a pipeline of 3 to 5x. That usually determined a fairly good, even, or at least a good runway to be able to predict into the future, and make sure that pipeline is fairly clean and fairly accurate, and you're moving those through the stages. That's a really good one. And then certainly capacity is probably an unheralded metric, but I think important, because I think it was Jameson noted around, making those determinations on revenue recognition. And capacity leads to revenue recognition, because if you don't have the capacity, we're always understaffed, right? I mean, we're kind of always perennially, a bit understaffed. You can then make that determination of FTE hires, I think everyone is sort of underestimating the time to bring on an FTE right now. Do we deploy freelancers on this? Then of course cast the team, but that capacity to take on work shrinks what I like to think of the speed to revenue continuum. Conversation with client leads to an opportunity. We close that opportunity. We have always in the agency world, I call it, it's not quite new business yet, or booked business. It's sort of that near business phase where we're kind of coming to the client with the idea that we're going to ultimately craft in a statement of work, that kind of middle couple of weeks while we're coming to commercials, all the way to their terms with your statement of work. You accrue time, generate the invoice, and collect. And in each of those steps, there's always that opportunity, I think, with a mix of process and technology to shrink that a bit. And then, to Jameson's point, you get more accurate on that booked and sold revenue to what you're able to really realize and recognize, and you don't have bleed into subsequent quarters and fiscals. It gives the whole firm, I think, really good confidence, and confidence becomes kind of infectious that this is a well-run shop. We do what we say. We can hit that delta within 10% variation, and a lot flows from that. So those are some key metrics, but I think everything the guys have noted as far as chargeability, EBITDA, certainly the revenue per employee, and conversely the effective rate are really good metrics. But I think capacity leads to so much. That's probably a metric that's a really good one to try to vector in on.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And I think that's helpful too for, again, Albert, as you pointed out, you had 50 plus metrics that are potential candidates for your scorecard. So it's easy to get, to get lost in the data and, lose sight of the ones that are either, the most critical in terms of performance. We have a question again from the audience. That's a good build on this, and we can just touch on it quickly. But it's a question around the pipeline forecast. And maybe each of you can just share quickly how you're calculating your forecast, and I mean within reason, and whether there's distinctions you use in terms of forecasting for retainers versus project work that may or may not be relevant to business you sell, but if there is any distinction in terms of how you look at retainer work versus project work. But Albert, can you talk to us just a little bit about the the forecast piece and kind of the key elements that go into it for you?
Sure. We're lucky enough to have several sort of ongoing relationships, retainer type of clients. So we have a pretty good view on that. So we're certainly sort of in renewal season now. So we're looking at what does that look like for 2022, but sort of on an ongoing basis. I maintain a couple of different ones. So first, what I would call our forecast, which is really just the signed work and when we anticipate recognizing that revenue. So that's sort of the baseline, right? From there, I have kind of the warm projects. Or deals rather, and those are those they're sort of in negotiation or within our pipeline that we're feeling really good about, like this is about to sign. And then the third being kind of what I call cold, which they're maybe getting into negotiation, but they're we're still not feeling great about them. And I know that's purely subjective, right? But we have weekly sales meetings and we talk about this stuff and we make adjustments and we shift it sort of on the timeline of when we expect to project that revenue. So that's kind of the approach that we have taken, but. I'm really interested to do what Brent said and sort of measure some of the time, like because those things slip, like how long does it really take to close, time to close, things like that. I think are sort of the next level we need to get to.
And just a quick question then on the retainer piece, and it would depend on your retainer structure, but are you executing retainers where there's sort of like equal payments and equal amounts of work happening on a monthly basis, or is in a lot of scenarios, a retainer could be equal payments on a monthly basis, but not necessarily equalized work. And, maybe you could just comment on that in terms of how you might be either projecting or accounting for, monthly variations in retainer work.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, historically, had it been more consistent work, like similar amount of hours every month, but we have more recently worked with clients where there's ebbs and flows to the campaigns throughout the year, and that's been much more challenging. We've done things like shift revenue kind of post quarter to different quarters. And I've even had one where we've had like maybe we charge the client a certain way, but we recognize the revenue internally kind of more similar to the amount of hours that are spent. So there's a little bit of adjustment there to kind of keep it more equivalent, because we really want to see the actual revenue we should recognize and the actual hours we're going to spend in every month, and not have it be distorted by the client's sort of payment schedule or whatever the contract said.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. Jameson, how about you in terms of just how you look at your pipeline forecast? And again, if it's relevant, if there's any nuance or complexity in terms of how you look at retainers.
Well, I mean, I think it's, going back to like revenue recognition. A big piece for us was, a few years ago, moving from accrual basis managerial accounting, from cash basis to accrual basis. And so, our retainers come in two flavors. One is more known. We would get a certain amount of money. We commit to, executing a certain amount of work in a period. We generally estimate that out 3 months at a time. Those are the easiest projects to forecast, because over time we are able to optimize those. So the reality is, pretty close, plus minus 10% from the forecast. We have, other retainer relationships that are much more campaign based, where, they're year over year clients, but, it's a mix of retainer and campaign work. And those are the most difficult, I think, to manage, because, you always want to capture that revenue if you can, but you're at the whim of the client to a certain degree. So for us, the panacea to that is, again, being very, very clear on the revenue that's being recognized in any given month. And so regardless of payment schedule, regardless of anything else, we really want to understand that revenue recognition. And that's given us the best intelligence yet, prior to anything that we did before that.
I was hoping on your retainer in two flavors, you were going to say the two flavors were large and extra large.
I appreciate that. That's a goal of mine. Large, extra large retainer.
We've got a simple ordering system here at Athletics. You can go large or extra large. Well, we have about 5 minutes left, and I know there's portions of the conversation we're not going to get to. I want to touch on one, and let's just try to touch on this one in a minute or two, because I still want to get to at least one more question. But one of the audience members asked about bringing kind of contractors and freelancers into the view of, your metrics and your data. And I don't know to what extent either of you guys use contractors or freelancers, but if you could just talk to that really quickly of, do you use them or not? And if so, are you able to kind of bring them effectively into how you capture and track data today, or is that still run a little bit on the side of your FTEs? Albert, I'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, definitely incorporate. We have sort of two flavors, I guess, of contractors, right? So what do we call freelancers, which are maybe more project based, maybe a couple of day rates or something like that, as opposed to what we would call FTE contractors, people who are working 30, 40 hours a week for us consistently. And those folks, the latter are, they're in Mavenlink, they're clocking hours, so they're built in, they're built into the cost. The other contractors is kind of cheating a little bit, but we put those hours in and they're 100% utilized. So that kind of bumps up our utilization a little bit. Others that are maybe just quick one-off for a week or a project, we kind of more just take as a direct cost expense, and it shows up more in the P&L than necessarily in our Mavenlink view.
Yeah. How about on your end, Jameson?
Yeah, we certainly use freelancers, and they're 100% integrated into Mavenlink. So not only can we track, but we can forecast. And so when we're starting to look at our capacity and understand the impact that freelance costs would have on margin, we have all that data. We cheat as well, Albert, where there's certain freelancers, especially some strategists that we work with that are quite senior, that we just treat as pass through. So we just kind of, hoist it above the gross profit and then deal with it there. But in general, most of those freelancers at that point are fully integrated into Mavenlink.
That's great. So we have just a few minutes left, and I want to kind of close with just a few future-looking thoughts. And I'll start with you, Brent, and it may be a little different than the future-looking question I have for Albert and Jameson, but we've got a lot of exciting, software-based capabilities that are coming down the pipe, particularly with AI and machine learning and and that kind of stuff. Maybe you could just highlight quickly some things you're excited about, to see, technologies come into the agency operating system that you think will be really helpful, and continue to address the way we get visibility into the business and the way we can get ahead of our decision making.
No, it's a great question. I'll touch on maybe two. One would be just the open architecture of modern technology platforms that have the ability to connect with other essential platforms in your business. So that's a trend that we embraced early, for instance, in our platform. And I think, 10 years ago as agency leaders, there were a lot of kind of bespoke platforms that were on-prem, kind of closed systems.
Yeah,
Were functional and useful, but tough to get the data out of. So I think overall, extensible modern frameworks that grow with you over time, where you don't have to rip a really important piece of technology out of the agency because it's no longer supported. If it's got an open kind of flexible platform, that's evident. And the other is certainly AI and machine learning. I mean, I won't let a lot of the cat out of the bag in terms of, for instance, our product roadmap, but that notion of being able to predict the skill, the satisfaction level, potentially propensity to success on a project, the mix of talent that you'll need 18, 24 months that aids you in that decision-making journey, we've started to implement. And I think, you'll just see in service companies as a whole, whether it's like on the HR type systems that are managing kind of talent, predicting maybe the length of a hire, predicting how long someone might be at the agency with all kinds of indicators, all the way through predicting capacity, demand, success, and the types of skills. Those seem to be pretty exciting. So I think extensibility, and then using AI machine learning as a multiplier.
Yeah, and then that's awesome. And I think when we certainly see on the extensibility piece, and Albert referenced this, they've got a finance system, they've got Mavenlink is their core kind of project and resource management system, and then HubSpot is their kind of marketing lead generation system, and and then there's HR and more, but there's inevitably going to be 3 to 5 maybe kind of core tools and platforms that you have in play, and if they're not easily plugged into one another, then we're missing a big opportunity there. So thank you for calling that out. Jameson, so I'd be in both Jameson and Albert, but I'll start with you. I'd be curious, just as you look to the next steps in your kind of operational journey, what are you excited about, and kind of what's next, and maybe just in the next year or so, just give us a glimpse into where you're hoping to be in terms of visibility into the business, or a better way of viewing the success and efficiency of your operation.
Yeah, I mean, for us, I think the next big push, we've captured it in our management goals is delegation and automation. When it comes to, our operating support systems, I'd reframe it as integration and automation. So, 1000% on what Brent said about open systems. We're all largely digital agencies, and we have great engineering talent. And, you can carve out some time to actually put some of that engineering talent to work to integrate and automate. And to me, that is just going to increase that at a glance, on demand criticality of our business intelligence, and make sure that, from executive leadership down to specific practitioners, people can get the intelligence that they need when they need it to make, informed decisions.
Yeah, awesome. How about you, Albert? What's next on the docket for you guys, and what's just a glimpse of where you hope to be in the next year or so in terms of your operation?
Yeah, I think it's just continuing to get more detailed. I've finally reached this point where I can combine, signed revenue with projected budget, forecasted budget, and then a sort of a moving target of what our employees look like. And that's only about 3 months out with fairly good accuracy, probably 5 to 10%. So my goal would be to stretch that out further, see if we could look further into the future, which may be a fool's errand. But the data that we do have going further with it, right? Analyzing, any of those metrics based on was the pricing type or the type of engagement that we're running to find out what type of engagements work well. Certain clients or certain client contacts do better than others, right? Like looking at utilization, down to the department, down to the role, down to the skill, and trying to identify, where we're either seeing benefits or challenges, and then again trying to solve any of the challenges that we discover and double down on the things that are doing well. And data is one of those. We built a data department. We spun it out of our media group, and so that's really an area of focus. And that's something that right now is focused on, client work, in terms of tracking, analytics, data science, some custom tool creation. But I really want them to move beyond that to influence creative and strategy and our technology groups. But I'd also love to turn them loose on our financial data and our, some of the metrics we're getting from Mavenlink, and just see if they can use machine learning and do those same kind of.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I want to thank you guys immensely. It was a great conversation today, and I think a lot of really good concrete suggestions. And for those of you out there who heard anything in this call that you wish you were doing within your agency, I think, as these guys pointed out, remember, every journey begins just with a step. So there's good places to start. You're not gonna get there with one implementation or one tool set decision. There's definitely an ongoing commitment to, I think, as Jameson put it at the beginning, to decide to be a really professionally run agency, not just a great producer of great work, but a professionally run and operated agency. And so hopefully you got some good inspiration and ideas of where to start, in where you might be in a couple of years if you can really focus on it. So I want a big thanks to Albert, Jameson, and Brent for joining me today. I want to close with just two quick plugs. Mavenlink and Brent in particular have a great podcast focused on the agency or professional services business. So if you want more of these kinds of discussions, you can head over to Mavenlink. I think it's Mavenlink/podcast, and you'll find out about the series there. And we have one more in our agency leadership series this year. We've got one more session. It'll be on December 7th at noon again. And we'll be talking to Michael Lebowitz from Big Spaceship, John Rocher from Handsome, and Dustin Califf from Tool of North America. And we'll be doing a year in review, what big stuff has been going on this year, how they've navigated the market, and a look ahead at 2022 in terms of what these particular agency leaders are excited about and where they see the opportunity. So we hope you'll join us for that session. The recordings for this will be available through Mavenlink and also on our website. And if you have any follow-up questions, for those of you on the call in the SoDA community, you know where to find me. So feel free to reach out. And for those of you not in the SoDA community, feel free to email me at tom.beck@sodaspeaks.com. And happy to handle any follow-up questions that you might have. So thanks again to our guests, and thanks all of you for joining us. Have a great day wherever you're calling in from.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.